So look, it's 1 minute past 2, so I think now's probably as good a time as ever. But thank you very much for joining our monthly learning webinar today. You've got myself, Mark Tynes, and the co-founder of Formation Tech, and I've got with me Stephen Jameson and Dan Ross from Fortinet. Welcome, thanks for joining.
Thanks, Mark.
No problem at all. Today we're going to discuss with Stephen and Dan some of the key issues and trends that we're seeing evolve in the wider security landscape. In the wings, we've also got Mike Gilroy-Scott, who's our head of technology. He's available to really any questions you might have during the session. And please do feel free to ask some questions, anything that pops up of interest, anything that we mentioned that kind of has a value to you, because it does form a good debate, and we've got the experts here to answer any questions. But look, for those who have joined our previous monthly webinars, there's a narrative that underpins a lot of what we talk about within these sessions, and that's really around the role of technology and how it supports what has been fundamentally a big shift to the way people work today. And there was an ongoing debate around the pros and cons of hybrid working, and this is more often not centered around things like productivity, accountability, and culture. These are all very important things. But a topic that rarely breaks through to this debate is security and how that works and how that fits into this new way of working. So the three topics we're covering today, firstly, securing the hybrid workplace, exploring how you can tackle the issues associated with hybrid working through ZTNA and other technologies. Secondly, vendor consolidation. That's not specific to, well, today it's specific to security, but vendor consolidation is something that's really happening across the whole technology stack. And third is some real life use cases that likely to be intertwined within those first 2 points, but we'll certainly try and finish up with some key ones as well. But look, thanks again for joining. And look, I think, Stephen, first question to you really. There's a bit of a habit in our sector for using acronyms for many things, and ZTNA is potentially one of those things. And I'd imagine the majority of people today have a good grasp of it, but just very high level for those who want to refresh or those who don't know what it is, ZTNA, what does it stand for? What's its sort of overriding principle of it?
Sure. So it stands for Zero Trust Network Access, and it's really a security model that's designed to support the modern workplace of how people are accessing corporate resources, as in applications, where they're accessing it from, what they're using to access that. And it's really, I suppose, an evolution of how people will traditionally have worked, being behind a corporate firewall. That model is no longer relevant today. So yes, it's really working on the principle of never trust and always verify users, access, and locations.
And if you look at what that's evolved from, so pre-pandemic, and we can talk about that just about, but the VPN was a common method of accessing a network, still quite widely used by many companies. Perhaps give a high-level overview of the journey people are taking, how it's evolving to ZTNA, and I guess why.
Yes, I mean, ZTNA has been around for a while, but I think it's fair to say that the pandemic really accelerated the need for a different approach over VPN to make it more scalable. And the main reason for that was, you'd have organizations, and I've got examples of some of my customers that went from having no remote workforce to their entire workforce being remote in a space of a few months. And I think the initial piece that people were looking at was, let's get these people connectivity so they can get access to the corporate applications. And then security is really was the next thing on the list, to make sure that they are able to do so securely, and you're able to verify that. And VPN, as much as it's good technology, it's always on, so that the model needed to evolve beyond just that.
No, quite right, and it's quite interesting. A lot of technologies we talk about, there was this big rush to the cloud, there was a big rush to support this new kind of workforce. And in practical terms, how does that user experience differ using something like ZTNA compared to, say, a legacy VPN type way of working?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Dan do that from a more technical point of view, but it is, in effect, it should be completely seamless. It is working in the background, and so the users don't notice it. As with all things related to technology, if it's a onerous task to roll out and for people to use it, then it really that project has failed. So it is at best invisible to the users.
And then you can. Yeah, and so Dan, delving into perhaps the more technical components of that. So the practical user experience or the practical user application. Do you want to perhaps just for those super techie people on the call today that want a little bit more insight into this technology, do you want to perhaps give us an overview on that from that perspective? You're on mute, Stan.
Oh, sorry, apologies. Having some connections issues this end. So from a technical perspective, really, if we consider a VPN, you connect to a VPN in the morning when you log on for work and to access those applications, and you may stay connected to that VPN for the remainder of the day, right? And there may be something that changes on that endpoint throughout the state of the day or throughout the period of the day that means you should no longer have access to that application. And the difference with a VPN is that you aren't consistently checking the compliance or the posture of that endpoint. Whereas with the ZTNA and that zero trust approach that Stephen has mentioned of always trust or never trust, always verify, we're taking that concept and applying it to every session that a user makes to access a resource or an application. So that's the high level difference between ZTNA and traditional VPN connectivity.
And a word that was used when we're discussing in the run-up to this is granularity. What does that mean for you in respect to ZTNA? So granularity of access, granularity of reporting, in terms of user experience.
Exactly. So in a more traditional remote access solution or configuration, it's very easy to accidentally create a bridge between the external untrusted networks of a home environment or a public Wi-Fi environment and a tunnel into that corporate environment to maybe an entire network segment or a very flat network. Whereas a ZTNA architecture, you're providing granular access to an application on a per session basis. So you're not having to open these big holes in firewalls to total network segments. It's to a specific application or even to a specific path of an application at a layer 7, an application layer. So far more granular and more controlled than a traditional VPN.
And Stephen, talking use cases, we spoke about healthcare customer and insurance customer. Do you want to perhaps delve into just some real case examples of how this has more specifically been used in the wild?
Yes. So I'll give you 2 examples. We had customer one was a insurance company. The other one is a private healthcare provider. And they, at pandemic time, entire workforce went to work from home, and in both cases, actually, neither of them have actually fully come back. So gone to the point of even closing buildings. So they've had, again, they did what I described. They got the connectivity piece sorted first, but they're now rolling out to their employees the access that they need per application, per group of employees. It could be in finance, in HR, to make sure they're getting the right access, and the principles behind it actually are, Dan's described it as verify each connection, give minimum access to people when they are, particularly when they're working remotely. And the other big assumption around it is assume there will be a breach at some point. So build a model to deal with that, so it minimizes any spread if there is a breach within the infrastructure.
Yeah, and in fact, it's interesting this sort of journey that customers have made for their applications, whether they've gone into SaaS. I mean, Microsoft is a huge part of a corporation's infrastructure now on the whole. And I guess it's a question if for a lot of the businesses who have moved to SaaS, who have moved to a lot of their workload to Azure or within SharePoint, the place for ZTNA in that environment, because VPN for those businesses is very much a legacy thing. They might still have the old application potentially. But possibly a question for myself, Dan, the journey for those types of organizations was actually ZTNA. What's your position on that?
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that the traditional VPN approach supports that legacy model of the applications and the data you're trying to access is in a single location, in an on-premises data center or a head office. And if you're an organization that's starting to consume more clouds and maybe multiple clouds, you then have the question of where should that user terminate that VPN, that gateway, and how do I connect those various data centers or or locations for my applications. The difference with the ZTNA is that we're not telling a user to connect a tunnel to a certain gateway. The client application or the endpoint client will know which gateway to direct its traffic towards to perform that ZTNA posture checking and then provide that access to that application. So it's fully supportive of this hybrid model where you're consuming applications in a number of locations and the user is also in a number of locations. And the last thing you want is a user base that is confused as to what VPN they need to connect to access a certain application. We've all experienced VPNs dropping in the middle of doing something or uploading something, and that can be very frustrating for a customer experience as well. So this ZTNA approach is more seamless and transparent to the user and more accommodating of applications being in multiple destinations.
You're on mute, Mark.
Mute, Mark.
Thank you. Schoolboy error there, excuse me. Yeah, for those companies then that are pure cloud, pure SaaS, Microsoft, you know, what is the answer for those guys? What is the journey for that with respect to this?
So it's moving towards I mean, there's a lot of talk around the SASE market, as in almost removing the security to be part of the cloud infrastructure, and that's very much designed for people that are using public cloud and multiple public clouds. So it's evolving from that. And my experience is there is obviously companies that are fully cloud, but in most cases it's a hybrid environment. So you need the ZTNA piece, and then that it does naturally evolve into the SASE story, whether that's today or whether it's in 18 months' time.
Look, SASE isn't a conversation for today. It's a big topic that's kind of been discussed quite widely in the market, but just going back to the acronyms, gives a quick definition. SASE stands for high level, and before we move on to the next part, vendor consolidation.
It is very guilty of doing exactly what you described right at the very beginning, of just throwing out words, expecting people to know it. So it stands for secure access and service edge. Again, it's just the way that people are now having that connectivity with things like SD-WAN, sort of application-led wide area networks, and then how that is then secured in the cloud and on-prem.
Fantastic, thank you for that. So the second kind of topic, and this is very much intertwined, and I'm sure we'll spill back into ZTNA and the wider conversation, vendor consolidation. So there is a debate in security around whether vendor consolidation is the right approach, because there are some parties who think that a multi-vendor approach gives a better security posture. As a stat from Gartner, 75% of vendors are looking to consolidate. So as a general move, this isn't just about security. We see this in the Microsoft world we're doing voice. So it's across the whole set, but the whole stack really. But you know, Fortinet strategy around vendor consolidation. So perhaps, you know, Stephen, if you want to perhaps give your position or Fortinet's position on vendor consolidation and why we believe and you believe it's the way forwards.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, you're right. Yeah, there's multiple approaches of buying point products to do a particular job. And I think but our message has always been around, you know, having a more coordinated approach to that. But I think the market now has reached almost at the tipping point of where, and this is where Gartner's own work is coming into its own, is the benefits you get from those individual point products. The amount of time and resource you need to manage all of those point products. With all the things that you have to do of, you know, remote users, different applications, lots of different locations, different use cases, and you know, there's that on one side of what an IT department is expected to deliver, and then you put it on the other side of, you know, there's a big gap in being able to get the right resources, as in people, time. So anything you can do to save time and pull those resources together is seen as a major benefit.
I mean, where we as an organisation have had a lot of success with this is with multi-site organisations that are either scaling through a sales function. Recruitment is been a sector that's been quite prevalent in that. They have a lot of centralized resource, and they often have sales functions in regions. But also scaling businesses that are buying businesses and need to have that sort of standard consolidation. There's some examples that have worked well, and the security position has been really prevalent there, where you can extend that fabric, you can extend the security profile. But again, to talk about sort of real world use cases, do you have some equivalent ones you could perhaps touch upon for today?
Absolutely, and actually the use cases you described to me are a very strong fit for the story we're actually portraying with what we call the Fortinet fabric, which is that vendor consolidation piece. And I'll give it probably a very solid example. One was a manufacturer. The second one is a car dealership. They have an IT department, but they have multiple sites. And the issue they have is obviously on site, they don't have IT people in every location. So they came to us originally talking around firewalls. But when they start to see the story of the fabric of what else you could add in there, and the important part in both examples isn't necessarily what people immediately think is the biggest benefit, which is cost savings. It's actually having a single management point where you can see your firewalls, you can see the switching and the network, and you can see the Wi-Fi, and manage all of those elements from a single location. But additionally, you're then extending the security piece because it's managed via the firewall out into the network. Network traditionally is just very good at passing packets and doing very quickly. We're now able to see the traffic and again make decisions behind that.
Yeah. And in fact, Dan, we were talking about this again in the run-up to like extending the firewall into the LAN. You said it's like an all-seeing eye, the fabric approach. Do you want to perhaps extend upon that a little bit for us?
Sorry, Mark, would you mind repeating that
You cut up. So just following on from what Stephen was saying there about extending the firewall into the LAN, extending the security posture into the LAN. You described it as like an all-seeing eye when we were catching up about this prior. Do you want to perhaps sort of delve into that a little bit further on a technical level for the guys interested in
exactly.
on the webinar?
Just caught what you were saying, Mark. So something that I see a lot of in engagements with new customers or existing customers is that they might have a very flat network today. There's no network segmentation, and that's partly due to the fact that they might have a separate switch and wireless stack or vendors to the firewall, right? And maybe there's on a technical level, they're doing some inter-VLAN routing between VLANs on a switch, which is fine. It serves a purpose, but it also means that the firewall that is designed to do inspection and give the go or no go on a session doesn't get to see that LAN traffic, right? So if we move that up onto the firewall and we take the approach of Fortinet of having the switch and the access point managed by that FortiGate, that local firewall, then all of a sudden that FortiGate becomes the all-seeing eye, as I was referring to, because you have total control over the LAN then, where you've got different network segments, north-south traffic, ingress, egress to the internet and private networks, but also east-west between VLANs and within a VLAN. So that's going to give a multitude of advantages from a visibility and enforcement perspective. And the idea is that the benefit of the solution is greater than the sum of its parts, and that's the ultimate aim of the platform approach.
Yeah, and Stephen, going back to Gartner, Fortinet have been doing this for many, many years. It's foundational, really, to the kind of core principles of what Fortinet set out to do. But for Gartner and CyberMesh, there's been a recent paper and some recent sort of content around that, really, because again, the debate around, do you go from multi-vendor to secure your network because you've got more places to catch something, or single vendor? But you perhaps touch a little bit more on that for us.
Yes, I mean, the approach, again, it is, I suppose, independently verified, and it's very similar to our own messaging by the Gartner report that you just referred to. Is, yes, Fortinet's got a large portfolio of products, but the important part for us is they are integrated. So in most cases, have been developed in-house. And why is that important? It means they easily talk to each other, they share information easily, they're centrally managed. and that gives obviously a lot stronger insight, but also extends the viewpoint across, not just having a security function that covers your internal infrastructure. You've got the ability to look out into the cloud, look out to the end users, and then being able to share that information easily. And taking it on a step further, what happens when you do see something that you should be concerned about? Much better visibility, but then automating what happens next. So being able to have a policy that it's almost a what if scenario. If I see something like this, take this action or send that traffic to the firewall. And again, that is obviously our approach, but it's also the approach that is now being pushed forward by the likes of Gartner with their cybersecurity mesh architecture of move from point products to more of a platform approach to deliver the security functions.
Yeah, and talking about analysis and reporting there, so there's kind of two core products that we host ourselves for our customer in Manager and Analyzer. They both have like a sort of line purpose, but from a manager perspective, when we're working with our sort of multi-site customers where they've got different tiers of engineers, the sort of roles-based access that provides us is really helpful. And perhaps it will go on in a moment, but you mentioned alerting and reporting equally when you're getting these particular scenarios, particular events. How are you seeing businesses address that? How are you seeing people kind of respond in real time and get the historical and current data to ensure that they are dealing with security as they best they can?
Yeah, I'll get Dan to answer that if you don't mind. Because I've been obviously we see the biggest benefit of this consolidation is the management point and having that centralized. Yes, there's other benefits around cost saving and spreading the the security view across that whole piece. But then you're right, is what else comes in when you've got alerts, what happens and how they work. So Dan, if you don't mind answering that piece.
Yeah, certainly. So something that we recognize as being really important when you're tackling a cyber incident or even just an incident in the network is that time to detect and time to respond. And you want to keep those values as low as possible, right? You want to be able to detect something in an ideal world before it happens, but more in reality, it's very soon afterwards. And you want to be able to effectively respond with all the information required to respond effectively. That response needs to also be as fast as possible to reduce the impact to the business from a data loss point of view or a loss of revenue because of productivity has gone down. So the likes of Forti Analyzer can give you that real-time analytics of this event has occurred, or these behaviors are changing, the performance of the network is changing, but you can also use it in a more proactive fashion to alert you on patterns of maybe indicators of compromise or early warning signals of things are not as performant as they could be in the environment, and it's time to start an investigation.
Yeah. And security is often thought of about being, whether you're talking about zero-day threats, you're talking about malware, but it can also be either human error or can be human hacking.
Yeah.
And in fact, going to the manager piece, which we spoke about, having that controlled access and the controlled change within profiles is again something that for our multi-site customers that have got sort of tiered engineering groups has worked really well as well. So I mean, do you want to perhaps just give a quick high level piece on that, either Dan or Stephen, whoever's best to answer?
Okay, no, definitely. I'll definitely give it to Dan to answer that piece.
So the application
sorry.
Yeah, sorry, you've got a bad connection. The application of Forti Manager really in the control of the environments and devices you've got through the stack from perspective of just keeping discipline and change management really around security within the business.
I'm awfully sorry, Mark, that last piece was gone again.
Fine. Is your connection a bit weak there? It was about the control and the issues one can have through lack of it in change management through security.
Sure,
and
okay,
the benefits
fine. So it's very easy to
have,
like config creep, right? When you make a change on an individual firewall, It's very easy to introduce human error, which is, we are all humans, we're not machines. We make mistakes, and if that mistake is missed in a particularly significant site, or you make a change that actually has a negative impact, as in it impacts performance negatively or productivity, then you're solely reliant on figuring out, what did I change on that particular firewall that's different to the others? Whereas if you take a more of a centralized policy approach, where there is a standardized template or provisioning template that works, and you make incremental changes and always test, then you're always going to guarantee that disruption is going to be minimal, and the experience and the configuration across the environment will be consistent.
Yeah, and we found that to be really useful. Again, I mentioned a moment ago where we've seen real success in deploying from multiple sites, for having a single vendor approach in those businesses that are scaling, or those businesses that have like regional or national kind of sales endeavors. So they can say, hey, we've got a new site opening up here. They know the policies, they know their profile, they can drop in the equipment, configuration is much more straightforward, and they can be sure that those standards are maintained throughout. And certainly for where we get involved, it's been very, very valuable for us. We've left a couple of minutes at the end here. I always like to finish up with a view from the experts on what's in the future, what's coming. But before we do that, do we have any questions from anyone at all on the webinar? As I say, if there's a particular topic we cover today, a particular area, we often sort of have follow-up sessions. If there's a particular sort of theme that's come through, we can have a deep dive into one particular area. So please do either reach out to your account manager, ask the question now, or come back to myself directly. But in the absence of anything direct right now, Stephen,
nothing in the chat. Nothing in the chat, Mark. But sorry, I've just come off mute just to say there's nothing in the chat. But I did have a quick question, if you don't mind, Mark, if I sort of dive in.
Of course.
Here.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah.
Just a fascinating conversation, guys, as always. But we right at the beginning of this webinar, we started talking about that kind of remote or hybrid workforce and ZTNA and how that can secure access to on-prem. Is there a way of leveraging that kind of never trust, always verify when inside the network? Is that a concept that Fortinet work on?
Absolutely. I mean, it is really independent of location. So the idea you've got trusted zones, i.e. you're behind a corporate firewall, has disappeared. You're still going to have those checks and making sure people have got access to what they should have or what's agreed as that policy across the board. And it's it's really almost forgetting the concept of a trusted zone.
Lovely, thank you. And the other one was just at the beginning, obviously the zero trust concept of never trust, always verify. Just to put everyone's mind at ease, the users who are using these platforms aren't going to get constantly asked for their password. How's that managed? What does it look like to the user?
Yeah, again, it is fairly seamless. You get occasionally, depending on how it is configured. Sometimes you'll just straight through, particularly if you're within the office. Other times I might ask you're using multi-factor authentication. So I work from home quite a bit. When I'm working from home, then I've got a token on my mobile. When I'm in the office, I just access the applications via a browser. There's no added security piece.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Stephen and Dan, so we've got a minute left. Just, always like to finish on this because it's kind of, got a couple of experts here in the space. Everyone's coming on to hear some different sort of ideas and different concepts that we've got in the current market. But where are things going? Starting with yourself, Stephen. Give us a quick view on that.
Yeah, I mean, I know we touched on it sort of halfway through around the SASE, and obviously I have multiple conversations on a daily and weekly basis. If you went back a year ago, people were aware of what it was, but are, sort of looking into it and getting more of a better understanding of what it actually meant. Now I'm seeing that people are building it into their plans as they start to adopt cloud more. They know they need to, again, evolve their security model. It's not change it, it's evolving it. And so things like SASE is now becoming more and more of this is part of our sort of security roadmap for the next 18 months to 2 years.
Very good. And Dan, from your part, how would you answer that question? Or what interests you? What things are coming around the corner, and what's the next big thing in this space?
Really, we find ourselves, or certainly from my perspective and a more technical side of things, is the rise of particular threat types. So ransomware continues to rise. Ransomware as a service, there's these threat actors that have very polished outfits in terms of they have staff, they have holidays, they have commission, and you can pay for an attack to be made against a particular destination on a subscription basis, right? Like you subscribe to Netflix. So as a vendor, we need to be able to respond to the increase in those threats. A lot of them are targeted at vulnerabilities on the endpoint. And the way we address that is to implement a behavior-based protection on the endpoint, namely endpoint detection and response. So we're not reliant purely on signatures. We're now looking at processes at a kernel level on the endpoint to determine should that process interact with this process on the endpoint or this target, rather than just reliant on those signatures, which we've already said 0-day today. There are no signatures of 0 days. That's the whole point. So we need to change the method, change the approach, and endpoint detection and response is the right tool to address the likes of ransomware, wiper malware, fileless malware, etc.
Fantastic. Well, that's been fantastic. And guys, thank you so much for joining today. It's been really insightful. I hope everyone else that's joined has found the same. So please do follow up with us. We'll invite you to, we run a webinar each month. It varies from security to we do a lot in space and voice, particularly around consolidation into unified comms and Microsoft Teams. But security is a big play right now. There's a lot of things going on in the market, and if there's a particular area you want to discuss further, please do that. And we'll certainly look to invite you to the next session. Hope you found it useful. Dan, Stephen, thank you so much again, and look forward to speaking again soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.